It is Sunday, the 13th of August, 2017. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I'm just starting up the second half hour of my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy, which include, but are not limited to, the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry that I and far too many other people have been subjected to by intolerant and abusive and even hostile atheist Unitarians, and also clergy abuse of all kinds, both sexual clergy misconduct and also non-sexual clergy misconduct. In fact, I try to avoid using that word misconduct these days because it tends to play down the seriousness of the problem. Misconduct sounds like a fairly minor offense, so I really try to use the term clergy abuse more often than not, either being clergy sexual abuse. When people say clergy abuse, people immediately think of clergy sexual abuse, but there are non-sexual forms of clergy abuse. There's verbal and psychological abuse, there's intolerance and bigotry, which obviously can include verbal and psychological abuse. There's financial abuse and so on. So there's various non-sexual forms of clergy abuse, which are nonetheless quite harmful. And what we're looking at here is the mission statement of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, which I find quite ironic in considering how devoid of any real meaning it is. Our spiritual community welcomes, nurtures, inspires, challenges. Together we take action in the world. Well, you may notice that it doesn't say what the Unitarian Church of Montreal welcomes. It doesn't say what the Unitarian Church of Montreal nurtures. It doesn't say what the Unitarian Church of Montreal inspires. It doesn't say what the Unitarian Church of Montreal challenges. And it doesn't say what kinds of actions in the world Montreal Unitarians take. But the fact of the matter is all of those things can be interpreted in a very negative manner. The Unitarian Church of Montreal welcomed the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry of Reverend Ray Drennan. The Unitarian Church of Montreal nurtured the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry of Reverend Ray Drennan. I won't say that the Unitarian Church of Montreal inspired the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry of Reverend Ray Drennan, because it already pre-existed his coming to the Unitarian Church of Montreal, I'm sure. So it didn't inspire it in terms of initially inspiring it, but by turning a blind eye to his intolerance and bigotry, it inspired him, and I'd say to continue in his anti-religious intolerance and bigotry. And so I could say that it inspired Reverend Ray Drennan to go on to intolerantly and abusively attack the state funeral of former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau in basically intolerant and insulting, offensive opinion editorial, indeed a very opinionated opinion editorial in the Montreal Gazette, which was published on October 9th of 2000, and in which he basically trashed the fact that the state funeral was a Roman Catholic service, that in Reverend Ray Drennan's atheistic, secularist worldview, it was wrong for the state funeral to be a religious ceremony. It should have been a secular ceremony. And he made that argument in an offensive and insulting manner. Challenges. Well, Unitarian Church of Montreal certainly challenges a lot of good stuff. As far as I'm concerned, it certainly challenges my right to protest against all of the injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy that I'm protesting against. The Unitarian Church of Montreal has repeatedly sought to suppress this protest, sometimes by misusing the Canadian Criminal Code to try to suppress this protest. So they've challenged things that they really shouldn't be challenging. And then, the actions that Montreal Unitarians take in the world include physically assaulting me. I'm not saying every member of the Unitarian Church of Montreal has physically assaulted me, but a certain number of Montreal Unitarians most certainly have physically assaulted me. Others, not just Reverend Ray Drennan, have insulted me and slandered me essentially. And these are actions taken by Montreal Unitarians and effectively condoned by the Unitarian Church of Montreal, by the leadership. You know, whenever I complained about any of these actions, you know, basically immoral and unethical and borderline criminal and even actually criminal actions taken by Montreal Unitarians, well, the Unitarian Church of Montreal as an institution just ignores those complaints. So yes, basically the Unitarian Church of Montreal as a spiritual community takes action in the world, actions that are in some cases immoral, in some cases unethical, in some cases borderline criminal, in other words just on the verge of being criminal, although not actually criminal, and then also actually criminal, such as the physical assaults on me, such as the theft of my picket signs, such as making false reports against me to the police, because making a false report against someone to the police is a criminal act. It's part of public mischief, and a certain number of Montreal Unitarians, including one who assaulted me, physically assaulted me, are guilty of calling in highly misleading and even outright false complaints to the SPVM police force in their outrageously hypocritical efforts to put an end to my protest in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. Even Reverend Diane Rollert has involved herself in misuse of the Canadian criminal justice system in efforts to force an end to my protest. So the highest levels of leadership of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, that is Reverend Diane Rollert, and also UUA, sorry, not UUA, but the Unitarian Universalist, or Unitarian Church of Montreal board members, you know, presidents of the board and so on, have engaged in these activities. Yeah, unfortunately that mission statement, which obviously is meant to be interpreted in a positive way, it's not meant to be interpreted in the, you know, diametrically opposed way that I have, but unfortunately it's open to that. It's so vague and generally worded that it's really meaningless. And even misleading, you know, because all of those things which obviously Montreal Unitarians want to be perceived in a very positive light can also be things that are indeed immoral and unethical and borderline criminal and actually criminal and so on. So just like to repeat that every now and then. And we're continuing our little protest and our little monologue today. And let's just make sure the camera's still running. Oh, yes, it is. I've had some situations where the camera has stopped running as I'm recording the protest. I pretty well have to record everything, or as much of everything as possible, as a result of the false reports that Montreal Unitarians have called into the police in their efforts to, you know, have me arrested on criminal charges so they can, you know, put an end to this protest, or have me ticketed into oblivion. You know, I've received some hundreds of dollars worth of tickets that I never should have been given, thanks to Montreal Unitarians calling in complaints to the police. I've had tickets for writing chalk slogans, which I do not believe anyone in Canada should have, regardless of the content of the slogan. You know, the simple act of writing a chalk slogan should be at least tolerated in the context of a protest. You know, I think also kids, you know, putting hopscotch marks on the ground, you know, that should also be tolerated. But you know, people should not be given tickets for violating municipal bylaws that prohibit dirtying the sidewalk for writing chalk slogans in the course of protest. And I have to say, it only happened once. Hasn't happened since. We've discussed this on a fair number of occasions with the police. I think they finally realized that, that I'm right, that strictly speaking, if it's not, clearly legal, that it's, one of these things that should be tolerated, in that, ticketing someone for writing chalk slogans, could be a violation of their constitutional rights to freedom of opinion and freedom of expression. I do believe there is some precedent clearly in favor of allowing people to write chalk slogans during protests. I did think it had actually gone to the Supreme Court, but I've since been informed that it never actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, but that various other courts in the country have basically overturned tickets for writing chalk slogans and that sort of thing. So essentially there is jurisprudence supporting the right of protesters to write chalk slogans during protests. That's just one of the ways that Montreal Unitarians try to conceal the truth about their clergy abuse problem and their clergy abuse cover-up and denial problem, and various other injustices and abuses and hypocrisies that exist not only locally at the Unitarian Church of Montreal, but in the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community, and indeed in the Unitarian Universalist Association, which, as far as I'm concerned, is thoroughly corrupt in at least certain areas. The UUA has behaved in a very unprincipled and essentially corrupt, one could even say evil, manner in its efforts to conceal clergy misconduct of the worst kind. So there's really no question that the UUA as an institution, and indeed all of the individual top-level UUA leadership, the UUA administrations of Reverend Dr. Peter Morales and Reverend Bill Sinkford and Reverend John Burens, to say nothing of Reverend William Schultz, also known as Bill Schultz. All of these UUA administrations have tried to conceal clergy misconduct, clergy abuse, or have even tried to deny it. They can't deny everything, obviously, because some things are public knowledge, but they try to, deny as much as they can, minimize what they can't actually deny, and so on. So no question that, and this is literally across the board. I'm applying that term to the UUA Board of Trustees. Every single UUA trustee who has been a member of the UUA Board of Trustees since the Unitarian Universalist Association falsely accused me of blasphemous libel is complicit in that immoral and unethical and indeed borderline criminal legal bullying, because I asked the UUA Board of Trustees to take action to ensure that Reverend Peter Morales was censured for his role in this, and that the UUA Board of Trustees took action to ensure that the Unitarian Universalist Association formally withdraws its false blasphemous libel accusation and other false accusations, publicly apologizes for those accusations, and tells the truth about how many Unitarian Universalist ministers are guilty of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. But every single UUA trustee has done nothing. They may have done some things behind the scenes. There's a few that may have tried to get some things done, but good day, sir. I'm enjoying the unique honor and privilege of being accused of blasphemy in 21st century Canada.
Are you a member of this church?
No, I got kicked out for complaining about clergy abuse and so on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But more recently, the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is the head office, if you want, of Unitarian Universalism in North America, kind of like their Vatican, if you want. They hired a Montreal lawyer to have me served with a demand letter which falsely accused me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel for blogging about pedophiles and rapists in the church.
Really?
So I think it's quite a unique honor and privilege to be accused of blasphemy by Unitarians, especially atheist ones in the 21st century.
What do Unitarians stand for?
Well, it's hard to tell. They have all these wonderful principles that they talk about, but they violate them on a daily basis. So.
Yeah, but I mean generally, like what?
Well, they have 7 principles, which, as I said, are basically pure hypocrisy because they don't live up to them as a rule. The first principle calls for, let's see now, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Second principle calls for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Third principle, I'll get back to the third principle. Fourth principle, free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Fifth principle, use of the democratic process in their churches and in society at large. Sixth principle, sort of rehash of everything else, justice, peace, and goodwill, and blah, blah, blah. And the seventh principle is respect for the interdependent web of all existence. And then coming back to the third principle, which I slipped, it's affirming and promoting the right of conscience. And no, wait a minute. I think maybe that's the fifth one. Again, coming back to the democratic process. I'll have to refresh my memory, but I'll tell you, my memory's a hell of a lot better than a lot of the Unitarian universalists in this church. If you go in there and you ask them to recite the 7 principles, most of them don't have a clue.
So this is a relatively recent church?
Well, the Unitarians have been around for centuries.
Oh,
okay. And in fact, you can see right here, the Unitarian Church of Montreal has been, not here, but in Montreal since 1842.
Oh, okay.
They're celebrating their 175th anniversary this year. As far as I'm concerned, it's probably 175 years of hypocrisy.
Yeah, well, I guess the same could be said of all.
No, I agree that but they make all these nice claims and then they totally disregard them and violate them, and I wouldn't be here if they weren't doing stupid things like accusing me of blasphemy in the 21st century. To hide pedophilia and rape too. I mean, that's pretty bad.
You lodged a